Obinna was a young man full of life, living in a small village at the foot of a great mountain. The villagers were peaceful, but there was something strange about the mountain. No one ever spoke of it, yet everyone seemed to fear it. One evening, Obinna's grandmother called him to her hut. She handed him an old amulet that had been passed down through generations. "Take this," she said, with urgency in her voice. "When the time comes, you will need it." Obinna didn't understand, but he promised to keep it safe. A few days later, a stranger arrived in the village, Pastor Akintoye. He was tall, with a warm smile and a commanding presence. He opened a church right at the base of the mountain. The villagers were drawn to him, attending his services, which seemed to bring a sense of peace. But Obinna felt uneasy. There was something about the pastor that didn't sit right with him. One evening, Obinna saw the pastor walk into the mountain alone, his shadow stretching long in the twilight. Curiosity gnawed at Obinna, and he decided to follow. Obinna followed the pastor through the thick forest surrounding the mountain. As he ventured deeper, the air grew colder, and the sounds of the village faded. He came to a dark cave hidden behind a veil of vines. The pastor stood at its entrance, his figure glowing with a strange light. "This is no ordinary man," Obinna whispered to himself, but the mystery drew him closer. Inside the cave, Obinna found a hidden altar, and there the pastor stood, chanting in a language Obinna couldn't understand. Strange symbols were carved into the stone floor as the pastor's voice grew louder. Obinna saw figures in the shadows, people who had gone missing from the village, their faces twisted in terror. The pastor turned, his eyes glowing with a deep, unnatural light. "You should never have followed me," he said softly. "Now you are part of it." Obinna ran, his heart pounding. That night, Obinna returned to his grandmother's hut, shaking. She knew something had happened. The amulet she had given him began to glow faintly. "Listen to me, Obinna," she said. "The pastor is not a man of God. He's a servant of the mountain, bound to its evil forces. You must go to the mountain's peak. There you will find the truth." The next day, Obinna set off alone, determined to end the mystery once and for all. The journey up the mountain was treacherous. The air grew colder and the shadows lengthened. As Obinna climbed, he felt a strange pull, like the mountain itself was trying to take hold of him. But he pressed on, the amulet in his hand growing warmer with each step. At the peak, a great stone door appeared before him, etched with symbols he recognized from the cave. His heart raced. Obinna pushed open the stone door, entering an ancient temple at the mountain's summit. The walls were covered in more of the strange symbols, and in the center of the temple stood a massive altar. The atmosphere was thick with dark energy. As Obinna stepped forward, the ground trembled. Suddenly, Pastor Akintoye appeared, his smile cold and predatory. "You shouldn't have come," he hissed. "Now you will join us." Pastor Akintoye revealed his true nature. He was not just a preacher but a servant of an ancient dark force, the very force that lived within the mountain. The church was its cover, and the villages were nothing but ponds. Every soul I collect feeds the mountain, the pastor explained. And now you are mine. Obinna could feel the mountain's power trying to drag him into the earth, its whispers reaching his ears. Obinna clutched the amulet his grandmother had given him. It pulsed with a powerful light, pushed back against the mountain's energy. The pastor laughed, summoning dark tendrils from the earth to trap Obinna. You think this trinket will save you? Pastor Akintoye mocked. The mountain is eternal. But Obinna held firm, the light from the amulet growing brighter. The ground split open beneath Obinna's feet, and a deep rumbling sound filled the air. The mountain itself seemed to awaken, its ancient power rising up like a beast. The air became thick with an unearthly force, and the very walls of the temple shook. Obinna could feel the amulet's power clashing with the mountain's dark energy, but it wasn't enough. He was losing ground. As Obinna struggled to hold on to the amulet, the pastor's power grew. Dark shadows surrounded him, pulling him closer to the altar. The mountain's voice echoed in his mind, promising eternal power and riches if he would only submit. But Obinna refused. I will never give in, he whispered, summoning every ounce of strength he had. The amulet began to glow so brightly that the entire temple lit up. Casting long shadows, Obinna felt the surge of energy as it pushed against the mountain's force. The dark energy recoiled, and Pastor Akintoye staggered back, his eyes wide with disbelief. No, this cannot be, he screamed. The light grew brighter still until the entire mountain seemed to shudder. In a flash of light, Obinna was thrown backwards, the mountain's grip finally breaking. He crashed to the ground, his body bruised and aching. The pastor, too, was knocked off his feet, his form flickering like a shadow before fading entirely. But Obinna's victory was short-lived. The earth around him began to shake violently. Suddenly, Obinna felt an invisible force pulling him downwards. The ground cracked open beneath him, and he was dragged towards the abyss. It wasn't the pastor's magic. It was the mountain itself trying to claim him. The light from the amulet flickered as Obinna fell, the world around him spinning. As Obinna tumbled into the darkness, he saw flashes of the past, visions of the mountain's long history, of people who had come before him and vanished without a trace. The mountain's hunger for souls was endless. For a moment, he thought he saw his grandmother, her eyes filled with both sadness and hope, as if she had known this would happen. Obinna continued to fall, his body weightless in the darkness. His thoughts swirled around him, a chaotic mix of fear and realization. The mountain was not just a place. It was a living, breathing entity, and once you entered its grasp, there was no escape. Suddenly, the fall stopped. Obinna landed with a heavy thud on solid ground, but there was no light, only darkness. When Obinna opened his eyes, he was no longer in the temple. He found himself back at the base of the mountain, staring at the familiar village. The sky was clear, the sun shining brightly. Was it all a dream? Had he truly escaped the mountain's grip? Obinna turned around, his heart racing. Standing behind him, smiling in a way that sent chills down his spine, was Pastor Akintoye. "You will never escape, Obinna," the pastor said, his voice almost kind. "Once you've entered the mountain's domain, you are bound to it forever." Obinna's blood ran cold as he realized the terrible truth. The mountain had claimed him, and he would never be free. As Obinna looked around, the village seemed unchanged, but everything felt different. The people he once knew now wore hollow expressions, their smiles empty. Pastor Akintoye had returned to the church, and the air around it was thick with dark energy. Obinna tried to leave, but his feet felt heavy, as if the mountain itself was pulling him back. "You can't leave," Pastor Akintoye whispered, his voice chilling. "You've come to the mountain. It's part of you now, Obinna. It always has been." The world around him seemed to distort, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. And as Obinna tried to run, he realized the inescapable truth. He was never truly free.